The coming of spring has long been considered a season of rebirth, a time when the slate is wiped clean so that life may begin again. Yet within a certain stretch of the American plains, from the Gulf of Mexico to the Dakotas, spring ushers in a force far more ominous. Dubbed Tornado Alley, 2,500 square miles east of an imaginary line running from Texas north to Nebraska, spawns more tornadoes per year than anywhere else on the planet. Warm air sweeping in from the Gulf of Mexico crosses the Great Plains, where it meets with southern traveling cool air. With nothing to stop these systems from colliding, these flatlands become a veritable breeding ground for tornadoes. By 1974, tornadoes have long since become a fact of life for the inhabitants of the region.
We have a little bit of everything. We have tornadoes, we have severe weather, winter weather, snow, but for the most part it's severe weather during the spring of the year.
But that year, the waters in the Gulf of Mexico are unseasonably warm, facilitating inland moving winds to pick up an inordinate amount of heat in the form of water vapor. A low-pressure system pressing in from the west further speeds these winds across the Gulf, forcing more water vapor into the air and further energizing the system. As the system moves inland up Tornado Alley, it is quickly met by Arctic winds sweeping down from the north.
And with that type of dynamic setup in the atmosphere, where you had a lot of instability and things of causing divergence, all of these ingredients really became more magnified.
The converging systems collide over the prairies and form an explosive system known as a supercell. But due to all the concentrated energy, the supercell becomes alarmingly large.
Evansville, which is west of us, they had a radar operator 24 hours a day. They called us and told us they had a thunderstorm that was approaching Louisville that was off the top of the range height indicator on the radar, which is the RHI indicator, and it was like 70,000 feet.
It is later calculated that the cell has the equivalent energy of a hydrogen bomb explosion every 30 seconds. By the evening of April 2nd, 1974, meteorologists are anxiously monitoring the weather patterns bubbling within the deepening cell, looking for telltale signs of tornado activity.
At that time, the warning system consisted of a Weather Service radar, had the capability of detecting tornadic type signatures.
These signatures, known as hooks, appear as thunderstorms in the shape of a fishhook. But throughout the night on April 2nd, none are noted. Although April 3rd, 1974 begins quietly, those in weather circles know it is only the calm before the inevitable storm.
We knew that the conditions were favorable for tornado development, and everybody knew from 8 o'clock in the morning what day that was going to be. And it turned out to be one heck of a day.
Throughout the morning, weather officials issue 28 severe weather watches, covering an area from the Gulf of Mexico to the Canadian border, and from the Mississippi River to the East Coast.
Those days, we had teletype systems. We didn't have computerized things like we do nowadays. We had, like what, a communicator. They typed up the warning and put it on in 75 words a minute.
Louisville, Kentucky radio station WHAS issues its first warning for Louisville at 10:28 a.m. Yet the day begins with little or no evidence of the dire warnings being issued over her airwaves. That afternoon, Louisville, Kentucky resident Jean Denker finds herself at home with her children.
Well, it was a beautiful day. It was sunshiny and warm, very nice. No weather problems or anything.
Likewise, in the city of Xenia, Ohio, 160 miles to the northwest, people continue about their Wednesday afternoon as they have for years.
In Xenia, everything closes at noon on Wednesday. That's the day the doctors and the attorneys and school teachers and people go play golf or whatever. For some reason, that's always been traditional in Xenia.
Others, however, find themselves in occupations that do not afford such extravagances, such as Susan Hull, who works at a local drugstore. Down the road from the drugstore, Susan's 2 children, Chuck and Jenny, spend the afternoon with their babysitter.
And they were friends of the family, and I remember being at their house and that the TV was on and the dinner was being able to be cooked.
Others occupy themselves with the ordinary chores of day-to-day existence, like Lisa Hale, who along with her mother and brother go shopping for a birthday present for their grandmother.
And I recall the sun shining in the front of the car, and it was, I believe I remember the radio coming on with a caution about the weather that day. But it was like, at the time, I asked my mother, a tornado, what is a tornado? And she kind of said, oh, it's, you know, they don't happen around here, and just kind of brushed it off.
Lisa's grandmother, Irene, finds herself embroiled in her job as director of the American Cancer Society. But by early afternoon, outside the small community of Debroah, Indiana, 194 miles to the west, the supercell finally yields the inevitable. At 2:40 p.m., the first tornado of the system erupts. Tim and Claudia Nagel find themselves traveling just south of Debroah, towing their 23-foot camper trailer, and the tornado suddenly descends upon them. 2/3 of Debroah are leveled in mere minutes as the twister blazes through town. Miraculously, Tim and Claudia Nagel emerge from their vehicle unscathed, despite the fact that their trailer has been launched into a bluff of trees. 20 minutes later, the twister sets down in Palmyra, Indiana, without warning. The storm yields its first casualty as it tears through Palmyra's trailer park community, where Harvey Lee Peace is found dead in the remains of his trailer. This first tornado would last nearly 2 hours and cover 120 miles before finally dissipating. Those in Indiana try to warn surrounding states of the impending danger, but due to downed communications, are unable to do so. The Palmyra tornado cuts a deadly swath through southern Indiana, but is only one of 148 tornadoes that would touch down that day. Before it is finished, the storm front hurls another into Kentucky, striking the town of Brandenburg and catching residents unaware. In less than 60 seconds, the tornado levels the town of 1700, blowing the roof off the courthouse and obliterating the town church. At least one home completely disappears. Weather warnings continue to be issued throughout the day for the areas of Louisville and Xenia. But due to the temperate weather, and with no idea of what is happening in neighboring Indiana, the warnings are largely dismissed. Even as the skies begin to darken, people have little or no idea of the severity that lingers in the clouds overhead as the cell prepares to unleash the full brunt of its fury. By late afternoon, the emergency broadcast system peppers the airwaves with tornado warnings throughout the area beneath the killer storm front.
It started happening late in the afternoon, which most of the tornadoes occur from 3 o'clock on, and there was a lot of tornadoes in a lot of states.
By 4 p.m., 148 tornadoes ranging in size from F1 to F5 are reported to have touched down in at least 10 states.
The Vegeta scale goes from F0 to F5. 0 would be something on the scale of 42 to 72 miles an hour winds, light damage. And for F5, going from 206 to over 260 miles an hour.
Shortly after 4 p.m., the weather takes a dramatic turn. In Xenia, skies cloud over so quickly that many people don't even notice.
the local weatherman came on the news and said there's a tornado watch. And I thought, he's got to be kidding, because it was beautiful.
Others, such as Susan Hull and those patronizing the drugstore where she works, are simply dismissive of the warnings.
Customers were coming in and said that they had just heard that there had been a tornado that had touched in Debroah, which is like 6 miles from Xenia. And I said, well, you know, there's not really that much to worry about, because tornadoes come down, they touch down, they go back up, they're gone.
But at the weather office in Louisville's Standiford Field, the situation is altogether different. Just before 4 p.m. that afternoon, meteorologist intern Russell Conger arrives for his shift amidst a cast of very tense co-workers. Moments after Conger's arrival, radar technician Jim McFarland notices the telltale hook forming on his screen.
He came out of the radar room and said a tornado was about 2.5 miles away. And everybody, at that point, everybody went to the window looking for it.
At 4:37 p.m., Conger and his co-workers look on as a giant tornado materializes before their very eyes.
Everybody ran for cover at that point, and the meteorologist in charge who was talking to the radio station, he slammed the phone down. He said, I'm going.
Across Louisville, the terrible realization of what is happening finally begins to sink in.
Our oldest daughter, Trini, walked to the door and she said, Mommy, why are the clouds sitting on the house across the street? I came in, and when I did, it was extremely, extremely black. And I could only think of one thing, that was tornado. And I just said, get to the basement fast.
The survival instinct takes over, sending everyone running for safety below ground. Above them, the unseen forces that have set upon them mercilessly make their presence known.
I thought that the whole top of my head had been taken off. I heard nothing but glass breaking all over.
In Xenia, the situation becomes a carbon copy of the one in Louisville, catching most residents completely unaware as the cell hurls the deadliest tornado of the system.
I was in the front of the store. As kids will do, I was looking at the bubblegum machines and wishing I had a nickel or a penny. And I remember my uncle coming in. He had an alarmed look on his face. And about that time, the lights started to flicker.
Then I started hearing the noises like trains, and I pulled back the curtain in the doctor's office and saw debris. I thought it was birds or something, but it was bricks from construction they were doing at the hospital at the time. And it was the housing development, pieces of houses blowing around.
Rosemary Foley watches helplessly as the tornado rips through Xenia. Upon seeing the funnel cloud, Susan Hull's thoughts turn immediately to her children, who she realizes are directly in the path of the oncoming tornado.
I tried to call her to see if she was aware that there's weather going on outside. Strange weather, so, but the phones were already dead. There was no contact, so I couldn't do anything. I just hoped that she knew it and was taking cover.
A moment later, the tornado converges on the drugstore.
It was a very loud noise, and it, to me, sounded like a jet airplane. It took the roof off of the building, broke the front glass.
Inside the drugstore, Lisa Hale and her mother take cover while the tornado rages outside, then all at once disappears. The residents of Xenia are caught without warning. What seems like an eternity lasts only a few minutes, followed by an eerie silence as people slowly begin to emerge from what is left of their homes and their businesses.
What I saw reminded me a lot of the pictures that you saw from World War II of the bombed out cities. Broken brick walls, a lot of debris laying around, just devastation.
When I got to the top of the steps, I looked around and I just said, don't cry, but we don't have a house anymore.
Minds race to comprehend the force it must have taken to cause such complete and utter destruction.
The tornado that went through Louisville was an F4. which is like incredible damage. 4 is pretty strong. I don't know if I think it's 163 miles an hour or more.
People race through debris-filled streets in an attempt to find family members. Others stay right where they are, despite the efforts of rescue crews to evacuate the area. Happily, Lisa Hale and her mother are fortunate enough to be quickly reunited with Lisa's father, but their sense of relief is quickly shattered.
Our thoughts immediately turned to my grandmother, my father's mom, who worked in the city.
But for Susan Hull, all she can think about are her 2 kids as she races to her babysitter's house.
I got to the beginning of the street and just the whole street had been leveled. I mean, there were hardly any houses standing at all. And I had just at that moment lost all hope. And I did not want to find my children. And I mean, I thought I had no hope for them. I turned around, I remember turning around and I said, I can't find my children that way.
Lisa's parents search diligently, but are unable to find Irene Hale, and are about to give up when a strange thing happens.
As they both started to walk away, my mother and my father, they said it was odd how something just struck them at the same time. They kind of looked at each other and turned around and went back into where the office area was. And my father says, as if guided, he went to the exact spot where he lifted up some rubble and found his mother, and she had been killed. When they picked me up that night, and the first thing I did when I got into the car is I asked my father, how's Grandma? And he broke down, and it was the only time in my life my father's ever been upset in front of me.
Meanwhile, Susan Hull continues her frantic search for her children. It is not long before she finds them.
We were walking down the road, and then my mom was coming up the road, and the babysitter started yelling to my mom, telling her we're all right. And I remember her coming up to us and crying, which I didn't really understand because nothing to me that had happened other than this big loud noise that went through.
Of all the areas besieged by tornadoes that day, Xenia, Ohio is the hardest hit, suffering 38 casualties and more than 1,600 injured. The 1974 Super Outbreak of tornadoes proves to be the worst in U.S. history. In less than 24 hours, 127 tornadoes touched down in 13 states. Damages are estimated to be in the hundreds of millions. People salvage what they can of their scattered belongings in an attempt to put their lives back together. In true Midwestern fashion, people converge on the area from as far away as Oklahoma to volunteer in the cleanup and reconstruction. Slowly but surely, the people of the Midwest persevere. Yet in the face of such tragedy, people try to make sense of their world, which has been so drastically altered.
The whole thing was, I mean, there's a period where you're just in total disbelief, you're in shock. You're getting over the grief of your loss, the loss of my grandmother. She was just such a wonderful person, and how could this happen? How could God do this, you know? And why to our town? And just the whole thing was just too much.
My mother was in the process of getting a divorce. The tornado happened on Wednesday, and her divorce was to be final on the Friday. And the courthouse was struck by the tornado, so it took all of her paperwork and threw it across the city.
I really seriously thought of dropping the divorce because I thought it was God speaking to me, telling me that they spared my children, so I shouldn't do it. But
as with any disaster, thoughts turn to how to prevent future catastrophes of the same magnitude.
Well, as a result of the 1974 tornado, we have tornado sirens that were purchased through federal money. There are 5 sirens here in town and 5 sirens in Xenia Township, which surrounds the city. Those are activated once a tornado has been confirmed.
The advent of Doppler radar is able to increase warning time up to as much as 47 minutes, giving residents in areas of potential tornado activity ample time to prepare. But for those involved in the super outbreak, no technological advance will ever displace the sense of despair that comes with the darkening skies.
I try to live life one day at a time after that, because it can change in an instant. Every storm has that potential for me.
I don't think anybody that's been in a tornado will ever completely get over it. I can see the fury on my front porch. The 15-foot beam that supported our porch was found 4 doors down the street. And so when I look at that, I think that there's a power greater than what I've ever known.
In the final analysis, the power rests with us to find ways to coexist with the world around us. We are and will always remain a design of nature herself, forever susceptible to her whims.